The wind tore across the Wyoming plains, kicking up dust that stung like needles against Clara Vane's bare arms. She stood in the yard of Amos Tully's trading post, her wrists bound loosely with twine, her face shrouded by a tattered shawl that smelled of mildew and despair. The other women beside her shifted uneasily, their eyes darting toward the men who gathered like vultures under the sagging awning. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, leather, and the sour tang of whiskey. Clara's heart pounded beneath her thin dress, but she kept her spine straight, her lips pressed tight. She hadn't chosen this fate, none of them had. Her father, crippled by debt and drink, had scrawled her name on a bride registry in exchange for a bottle of rye. "You're no use to me," he'd slurred. "Maybe someone out here will take you." The letter from Amos Tully had been blunt. A man's looking for a wife. No dowry, no questions. Be here by month's end. Clara had traveled 3 weeks by stagecoach, her only possessions a patched satchel and the shawl she now wore to hide her face. The other women whispered about her in the dark corners of the coach. "Too plain for picking," they'd said. "No man'll want her." Amos had tied the shawl himself, muttering that it was for her own good. Shame, not modesty, was the reason. Clara didn't argue. She'd learned long ago to swallow her pride. Inside the trading post, the air was stifling, heavy with tobacco smoke and the low hum of voices. Men bartered over pelts, nails, and barrels of salt pork. Then Amos's voice cut through, sharp and oily. "Gentlemen, step outside. Got a fresh lot of brides today. Good workers, quiet tongues. Who's looking to settle down?" Clara's stomach twisted as boots thudded toward the yard. She heard the men's murmurs, their laughter, their crude jests about the merchandise. Most of the women were chosen quickly. Younger ones, prettier ones, their faces uncovered, their smiles forced but bright. Clara stood last, the shawl itching against her skin, her hands trembling. No one approached. She was the leftover, the unwanted, the one Amos had warned would likely be sent to scrub pots in a mining camp if no man claimed her. Then a shadow fell across her. She didn't dare look up, but she felt the weight of a gaze, steady and unhurried. The man's voice was low, rough like gravel underfoot. "What's with the shawl?" Amos chuckled. "That one? Let's just say she ain't here for her looks. Strong, though. Can cook, clean, mend. Good for a man who don't care about the face." The man didn't laugh. "And if I do care?" Amos hesitated, thrown off. "Well, Gideon Holt, you'd be the first to ask about her." "Most men want—" "I ain't most men," Gideon cut in. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a quiet authority that silenced Amos mid-sentence. "What's her name?" "Clara Vane," Amos muttered. "Family sent her west. Said she's more trouble than she's worth." Clara's chest tightened, but she kept still, her breath shallow beneath the shawl. She waited for the rejection, the dismissal she'd heard so many times before. Instead, Gideon spoke again, softer this time. "What happens if no one takes her?" Amos shrugged. "Back east, maybe. Or she'll work the camp kitchens. Don't matter to me." A long silence followed, broken only by the creak of the trading post sign swaying in the wind. Then Gideon said, "Untie her hands." Amos snorted but complied, slicing the twine with a pocket knife. Clara's wrists fell free and she rubbed them instinctively, still not daring to lift her head. Gideon stepped closer, his boots crunching in the dirt. She could smell pine and wood smoke on him, the faint musk of a man who lived close to the earth. "Can you walk a mile?" he asked. She nodded, her throat too dry to speak. "Then you're coming with me," he said simply. "Storm's brewing." Before she could process the words, Amos was shoving a paper into Gideon's hand, a crude marriage contract. Gideon signed it without a glance, tossing a handful of coins onto the counter. "That's enough," he said and turned to Clara. "Let's go." They walked in silence, the wind whipping dust around them as they left the trading post behind. Gideon didn't ride a horse. He'd come on foot, his broad shoulders hunched against the gusts. Clara clutched her satchel, the shawl still covering her face, her steps faltering on the uneven ground. He didn't rush her, didn't speak, just kept a steady pace until the plains gave way to a narrow trail winding into the foothills. The air grew colder, sharper as they climbed. By the time they reached a small cabin nestled among pines, the first flakes of snow were falling. "Inside," Gideon said, holding the door open. The cabin was sparse but warm, with a stone hearth, a single table, and a bed tucked in the corner. A small quilt, patched and faded, hung over a chair. Clara hesitated, then stepped inside, the heat from the fire a shock against her chilled skin. She stood awkwardly, unsure of what came next. Gideon hung his coat on a peg and turned to her. "You can take that shawl off," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "No need for it here." Her hands froze on the knot at her neck. She'd worn the shawl for so long today, it felt like a second skin, a shield against the world's judgment. "I'd rather not," she whispered. He studied her for a moment, his eyes the color of storm clouds, deep and searching. "Suit yourself," he said, but there was no mockery in his voice. "There's coffee on the stove. Help yourself." She didn't move. He busied himself stoking the fire, adding logs until the flames roared. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Clara found her voice. "Why did you choose me?" Gideon paused, a log still in his hand. "Didn't choose you," he said. "I chose not to leave you there." Her breath caught. "You don't even know what I look like." He set the log down and turned to face her. "Don't need to. I know what it's like to be left behind." Something in his voice, raw, unguarded, made her chest ache. She wanted to ask more, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she moved to the stove, pouring coffee into a tin mug with shaking hands. The warmth of it steadied her, and she sat at the table, still shrouded in the shawl. That night, the storm hit hard. Snow battered the cabin, the wind howling like a living thing. Gideon gave her the bed, spreading a blanket on the floor near the hearth for himself. "Sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's a new day." Clara lay awake, listening to the storm and the soft crackle of the fire. She didn't know what to make of Gideon Holt, a man who'd bought a stranger without seeing her face, who spoke little but seemed to see everything. She pulled the shawl tighter, not ready to let it go. Morning came, gray and cold. The snow had piled high against the door, sealing them in. Gideon pushed it open with effort, letting in a blast of icy air. Clara, already awake, was kneading dough she'd found in a tin of flour. The cabin smelled of yeast and warmth. Gideon stopped in the doorway, surprised. "You bake?" She nodded, shy. "My mother taught me. I hope it's all right." He crossed the room, looking at the dough taking shape under her hands. "More than all right," he said softly. "Feels like something I forgot I missed." They ate breakfast in silence. Fresh bread with a smear of honey he'd pulled from a jar. The quiet wasn't strained, but it held a weight, as if both were testing the edges of this strange new life. Afterward, Gideon handed her a coat, too large but warm. "Come outside," he said. "The air's clear now." She followed him into the snow-draped world, the shawl still covering her face. The pines stood tall, their branches heavy with white, the sky a pale, endless blue. Gideon pointed to a frozen stream nearby. "That's where I fish in spring," he said. "Trout run thick. You ever fish?" "No," she admitted. "But I can learn." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Good. You'll need to up here." They walked a little farther, the snow crunching under their boots. Clara felt the cold bite through her borrowed coat, but there was something alive in it, something that made her feel less like a ghost. Gideon stopped by a small wooden cross half buried in the snow. "My sister," he said quietly, "died 2 winters ago. Fever took her." Clara's heart sank. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, but his eyes were distant. "She was all I had up here. After she was gone, I thought I'd stay alone. Easier that way." "Why didn't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her then, the shawl hiding her face but not her eyes, which shone with a quiet strength he hadn't expected. "Didn't feel right leaving you there," he said. "Not after I saw you stand so still like you were waiting for the world to break you." Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words caught. Instead, she reached out and touched his arm just for a moment. He didn't pull away. That evening, as the fire burned low, Clara sat by the hearth, her hands idle for the first time all day. Gideon was carving a piece of wood, the knife moving with practiced ease. "You don't talk much," he said, not looking up. "Neither do you," she replied, a spark of boldness surprising her. He chuckled, a low, warm sound. "Fair enough." but I reckon we'll have time to learn. For the first time, Clara felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared name: hope. The shawl still clung to her, but its weight felt lighter, as if the mountain itself was teaching her to breathe again. The days turned into weeks, and the Wyoming winter held the cabin in its grip. Clara and Gideon settled into a rhythm, not of husband and wife, but of two souls learning to share a space. She cooked, mended, and scrubbed the cabin until it gleamed. He chopped wood, hunted, and taught her the small secrets of the land: how to read the tracks of a deer, how to spot a storm before it broke. The shawl stayed on, though Gideon never pressed her to remove it. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not with judgment, but with a quiet curiosity, as if he were waiting for her to decide who she was. One morning, as Clara stirred a pot of rabbit stew, a soft knock came at the door. Gideon opened it to reveal a boy, no older than 7, bundled in a coat too big for him. His cheeks were red from the cold, his eyes wide and wary. "Mr. Holt," he said, voice trembling. "Ma sent me. Said you'd know what to do." Gideon knelt to the boy's level. "What's wrong, Sam?" "Pa's hurt," Sam said. "Fell from the barn roof. Ma can't move him." Gideon grabbed his coat, then turned to Clara. "Stay here. Keep the fire going." But Clara was already pulling on the oversized coat. "I'm coming," she said firmly. "You might need help." He hesitated, then nodded. "Stay close." They followed Sam through the snow, the boy leading them to a homestead a mile away. The wind howled, but Clara kept pace, her breath fogging beneath the shawl. When they reached the small farm, they found Sam's father, Tom, lying in the snow, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. His wife, Ellen, knelt beside him, her face pale with fear. Gideon assessed the injury while Clara knelt beside Ellen, offering her hand. "He'll be all right," she said softly, though she wasn't sure. Ellen gripped her hand like a lifeline. With Gideon's strength and Clara's steady hands, they carried Tom inside, laying him on a cot by the fire. Clara tore strips from an old sheet, binding his leg as Gideon instructed. Her fingers were quick, precise, the shawl slipping slightly but not falling. Ellen watched, gratitude in her eyes. "You're a godsend," she whispered. Clara shook her head. "Just doing what I can." They stayed until Tom was stable, Gideon promising to send for a doctor when the trails cleared. As they trudged back to the cabin, the snow falling softer now, Gideon glanced at Clara. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. "Felt right." He nodded, and for the first time, she saw pride in his eyes. The next day, Ellen arrived at the cabin with Sam, carrying a basket of apples. "For your help," she said, her eyes lingering on Clara's shawl. "You're welcome at our place anytime." Clara smiled beneath the fabric. "Thank you, Ellen." After they left, Gideon sat by the fire carving again. "They like you," he said. "They don't know me," Clara replied, stirring the stew. "They know enough," he said. "You've got a way of making people feel seen." Her hand stilled. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the words felt too big. Instead, she sat across from him, the fire casting shadows across the shawl. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you see?" He set the carving down, his eyes meeting hers through the narrow gap in the fabric. "Someone who's stronger than she knows. Someone who's been hurt but hasn't broken." Her breath hitched. For the first time, she reached up and loosened the shawl, letting it slip to her shoulders. Her face was plain, freckled, with eyes the color of a winter sky. Nothing remarkable, but nothing to hide. Gideon didn't flinch, didn't look away. His gaze softened, and he smiled, a small, real thing that warmed the room more than the fire. "You're beautiful," he said simply. Clara's cheeks burned. "I'm not." "You are," he said, his voice steady. "Not the kind that fades. The kind that grows." She didn't know how to answer, so she didn't. But that night she left the shawl off, folding it neatly by the bed. When she woke, she found Gideon had placed a small mirror on the table, a gift, unspoken but clear. Spring came slowly, the snow melting into streams that sang through the valley. Clara began to venture out more, helping Ellen with chores, teaching Sam to knead dough. The townsfolk still whispered, but their words had softened. "Gideon's bride," they called her, not with scorn but with a kind of awe. She walked with her head high, her face bare, her heart lighter than it had ever been. One evening, as the sky burned red over the plains, Gideon took her to the stream. He handed her a fishing rod, his hands guiding hers. "Like this," he said, showing her how to cast. Their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away. "You're patient," she said, watching the line bob in the water. "Had to learn," he replied. "The mountain doesn't rush," she smiled. "Neither do you." He looked at her then, his eyes holding hers. "Some things are worth waiting for, Clara." Her heart raced. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she already knew. That night, as they sat by the fire, she sang a soft hymn her mother had loved. Gideon listened, his carving forgotten in his hands. When she finished, he said, "You've made this place a home." "It was already a home," she said. "I just helped you see it." He reached for her hand, his touch warm and sure. "Stay, Clara," he said. "Not because I bought you, but because you belong." She squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." Months later, the town held a festival to celebrate the thaw. Clara and Gideon walked through the crowd, Sam running ahead, laughing. The whispers had faded entirely, replaced by nods of respect. Ellen hugged Clara, whispering, "You've changed him. You've changed us all." Clara shook her head. "We changed each other." As they returned to the cabin, the stars bright above, Gideon stopped on the trail. "I used to think I'd live and die alone," he said. "But you, Clara, you're my second chance." She took his hand, her voice steady. "And you're mine." They stood there, the mountain around them alive with the hum of spring, their hearts no longer hidden, their lives no longer bound by shame or solitude. Clara Vane, once veiled in dust, had found a love as enduring as the land itself, a love that saw her truly and never looked away.